I think the cancellation, which I think is the second time now they've cancelled the Navy Day parade in St Petersburg, is actually significant. It comes after that very slightly humiliating Moscow parade celebrating the end of the Great Patriotic War, in which, as if you remember, Putin had to go to Trump to ask Zelensky not to attack it, which was pretty humiliating. So cancellation of the Navy Day parade. Well, why did this happen? I think they've already cited security concerns. So, that's the reason they've given. So what are the reasons? Well, firstly, there have been a couple of really major attacks on St. Petersburg in recent weeks. There was the one obviously on the oil terminal during that global economic conference, which was a humiliating moment. And then, of course, we've had the attack on the Wildberries store in the last few days. One of, I think, 6 attacks on Wildberries warehouses across Russia and incidentally including Crimea in recent weeks. I think one of the interesting things about this, obviously, it's destroyed a lot of valuable equipment in these stores, some of which goes to the Russian military. But I think almost equally impressive is the huge plumes of black smoke which then appear over the city. And you've seen on YouTube and other means, you've seen Russians expressing their dismay at the black smoke, and it's bringing the war home to Russia in a way that prior to 2026 it wasn't really happening. Now it really is happening in a number of ways. Actually, it's not just the warehouses and the cancellation of the Navy Day parade. It's the fact that there is likely to be conscription announced this year, probably, I guess, after the State Duma elections in September. There's talk about 500,000 Russians needing to be recruited. So for the first time, instead of recruiting people purely from sort of secondary and tertiary cities, they're going to probably start coming for people from Moscow and St. Petersburg, who, and this will affect the mood in Russia about the way the war is going. So I think taken all together, I mean, cancellation of the Navy Day parade in the scheme of things, relatively minor, but actually assumes a significance if you take it together with other things, including a thing that went remarkably unreported was the attacks on the Shadow Fleet in the Black Sea in recent days. I mean, many drone attacks on Black Sea tankers. 30%, between 20 and 30% of the Black Sea fleet of the Russian Navy is now incapacitated and has moved from Sevastopol across to Novorossiysk, further over to the east. So the Russian Navy's taken a pounding, and for the first time, Russians have seen the war coming home to roost. And I think the interesting thing I think you then derive from this is the question, what is this doing to Putin and his standing inside Moscow? I think it's very damaging to Putin's domestic image. I mean, let's take it in stages, really. Firstly, the war really hasn't come home to Russia until this year, 2026, with these big attacks in St. Petersburg and Wildberries and against the oil terminals, and huge queues now to fill up with petrol if you're in Russia. So suddenly people are beginning to see a direct consequence of the war. I mean, previously, obviously, they were hit by prices and sanctions and so forth. But as I think we've commented several times before, the Russians have got a great capacity to take pain. But I think at the moment, a lot of people must be questioning the war and questioning Putin's competence. And, the thing is, of course, this is all very secretive and one simply doesn't know what is happening within the walls of the Kremlin. But I think there are indications that Putin is feeling rattled. We saw that over the Victory Day parade in Red Square. So I'm sure Putin is feeling under pressure, and I'm sure there are people in the top echelons of the Russian system saying, "Look, this man's lost the plot. This isn't going well." Unfortunately, I suspect more are taking that line from the right, if you see, from the left, i.e. this war should be fought harder and more impressively, and that Putin has, fought it with one hand tied behind his back. I think it's more likely that that is the sort of criticism, rather than people saying, "Oh, let's make peace with Zelensky and this whole thing's a mistake." I don't think that is a more likely scenario. But then, if you look at the other things, the Ukrainian progress on Crimea in 2026 has been quite amazing. Again, it's using missiles and drones, but it's put Crimea under a lot of pressure. So the various bridges have been attacked. Power generation sources have been attacked. A Wildberries store has been attacked, as we know. An S-400 Russian anti-missile system has been destroyed. I mean, Crimea is beginning to feel the pressure. There's queues for petrol. There are significant electricity blackouts. And quite a few people who were migrants into Crimea after 2014 are drifting back to Russia again. So, this was Putin's one big victory in 2014, taking Crimea. And now even Crimea is under threat. Now, I don't think for a moment the Ukrainians are going to take back Crimea. And incidentally, if they tried to, it would be a mistake. Because at the moment, I think defense, munitions, and the state that we're at, it strongly favors the defense over the offense. So for as long as they're on the defense, I think Ukraine are doing extremely well this year. I think if they moved to try and take some of that territory south of Kherson towards Crimea, I think that'd be a big mistake, and they would begin to suffer significant losses. But nonetheless, the point still is true that Putin's big success, which was Crimea, is now not looking like a particularly great success at all. Yes, it's true they're making progress in the Donbass and making a little bit of progress in other places too. But by and large, the campaign is not going well if you're Putin. And the one thing that Putin has going for him, and where Zelensky, I think, is a very worried man, are the ballistic missile attacks on Kyiv and other towns, because Ukraine has run out of interceptor missiles. There are no interceptor missiles left in the United States or Europe. A lot, I think as many as 1,000, have been used in the Gulf in the Iran war. So there are no PAC-3 Patriot missiles left. There are no Aster-30 missiles left, the European variant. So Ukraine is relying, I think, on its own Freya missile, which it is developing, but is not ready yet. There has been the agreement, obviously, to do local manufacture of the Patriot missile. I'm still a little bit unsure how serious Trump's approval of that was. I think it was sort of slightly given at the moment during the NATO summit. But is it really serious? When we start to get down to tricky questions like the transfer of technology and the danger of some of that technology falling into Russian hands, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Trump begins to row back on that idea of local Patriot manufacture. So that is the big worry from Zelensky's point of view. It's the ballistic missile worry. But for the moment, he's got 2 months, 3 months until the end of September to continue to make big progress on Crimea and these deep strikes into Russia. And then I think when the winter comes, we will see the balance of advantage swing back in the favor of Russia with these attacks on Kyiv, and us all beginning to worry whether Ukrainian morale is going to hold out throughout a long winter. Ukraine has a fantastic record at defending itself against the Shahid drones, which are now produced, of course, in Russia. I think they're called Geran drones in Russia. And also against cruise missiles and other incoming stuff. The one thing they don't have an answer to are the ballistic missiles. These are the missiles coming down vertically at very high speed from space and taking out whole Kyiv buildings and so forth. And for that, they were very reliant on the Patriot missiles. But the missiles have basically run out. And incidentally, the United States and Europe have whittled down their own stocks of these interceptor missiles to such an extent that, in a sense, it's almost endangering Western and Western security as well. So I think there may be a dribble of interceptors going to Ukraine, but not nearly enough until they can produce their own, either the American Patriot, but I think there's a problem, as I suggested earlier, and their own Freya. I think they are very, very vulnerable come the winter, which means that, they've still got 3 months to make as much progress as they can during these summer and autumn months before, I fear, tide will begin to swing back in favor of Moscow. Putin went to St Petersburg and spoke at a conference there, and his speech actually was quite worrying. And I think this is the thing. Putin, under pressure, which he undoubtedly is, and Putin probably under criticism within the Kremlin, although, people have to be very careful about speaking out, and I'm sure are being very careful. But nonetheless, Putin is undoubtedly under pressure. Putin under pressure is a dangerous person. And there were, in his speech, he started to mutter about the power of our ballistic missile submarines, which of course carry nuclear weapons. So this was another veiled reference to, we are not powerless. Okay, we are taking punishment at the moment, but we are not powerless. So he's played this before. He's played this card before several times, and by and large, the West has called his bluff rightly. But there is no doubt that a wounded Putin will be a dangerous animal, and and Putin is not going to accept defeat easily. So yeah, obviously a lot of people want Ukraine to continue to succeed, want Ukraine to get a good deal at any peace negotiation. But it's still difficult to imagine Putin signing a peace negotiation in which he gives up his gains in the Donbass and Crimea. I mean, it's very, very difficult to see, I'm afraid. Warfare is changing, and the Ukraine war has probably changed warfare more than pretty much any warfare since the Boer War, I should think, about how war should be fought. And one of the big lessons is the vulnerability of large ships. We all saw the Moskva go to the bottom in 2022, and since then, I think between 20 and 30% of the Black Sea Fleet of Russia has been lost. Lost to, and Ukraine doesn't have a navy, so this is lost to marine drones and some aerial drones. And some missiles, but largely marine drones. And yes, and I mean, we saw, actually, didn't we, in the defence investment plan of the UK announced just last month, that Britain is now putting a lot more of its naval budget towards marine drones rather than actual vessels, which have, or surface vessels, I should say. Surface vessels have now become extremely vulnerable. Submarines, of course, are not, and so submarines are still a weapon for the future. But large warships are very vulnerable to attack by marine drones. So yes, it's one of the many big changes to warfare that we've seen in recent years. As well as taking on the Black Sea Fleet, which has been a work ever since 2022, but has made big progress in recent times too. There have been the attacks in recent weeks, in recent days, including on the shadow tankers in the Black Sea, with several hit by drones and missiles. Now, actually, this is slightly humiliating for Europe, I think, in a way. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that the West, in inverted commas, has interdicted 14 shadow tankers out of 700. And so to see Ukraine go after, I think the figure is something like 150, tells you something about what still needs to be done to prevent the shadow tankers exporting Russian oil around the world, which is financing the war. So yeah, that's been another Ukrainian success. Zelensky has been wise, I think, not to rub the noses of European leaders into that success. I think he must be deeply frustrated that Europe hasn't done more against the shadow fleet. When you think that a lot of them go out of the ports on the Baltic, travel through that narrow strait between Denmark and Sweden, where they could easily be interdicted, and then travel through the English Channel between France and England, where they'll be interdicted. Well, France has interdicted, I think, 2, and UK has interdicted 1. I mean, it's not a fantastic performance, it has to be said, and a lot could be done. But Zelensky's become wiser as he's got older. And I mean, if you remember in the early days, he had a habit of annoying Western leaders with his constant requests and criticisms. He's now much more subtle about how he goes about it, and very wisely, I think. He looks a worried man, President Zelensky. He was being interviewed yesterday, I think, on another channel. He looks a worried man, and I think what he is worrying about is this coming winter. Obviously, one of the reasons why Zelensky is looking worried is that there's been this. He sacked the defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, who was extremely popular, and then was forced to sack the chief of staff, General Siersky, a few days later. So he's sacked now the defense minister and the commander of the army. Now, Zelensky is absolutely correct. You cannot have the defense minister and the general of the army constantly quarreling. You know, they've got to learn to work together. So they've both been sacked. I think a little bit too much has been made of the popularity of Fedorov. Fedorov rather gives the impression that he single-handedly has helped turn the tables on Russia because of the use of drones. And he's very true. He had very good relationships with Palantir and some of the other Western AI and drone companies. That is absolutely true. But it's, you know, he was part of a successful team, which involved also the SBU, the intelligence service, and the military service, the HUR. So a lot of people are responsible for Ukraine's recent successes, not just Fedorov. I slightly suspect that the reason why Fedorov is so popular amongst young people is not just that he is young and dynamic and looks very different to the old Soviet-type General Siersky, but it's because Fedorov sort of promises that, or suggests that the new form of warfare of drones needs fewer soldiers and therefore a less stringent conscription system. And the truth of the matter is, not enough Ukrainians are volunteering to fight on the front line. Not surprising in many ways, because it's an extremely dangerous experience, extremely dangerous and extremely unpleasant experience serving on the front line. But I think some of these demonstrations in favour of Fedorov are in favour of people who think, well, drones provide an easy solution to the war and that we don't need soldiers. And the truth of the matter is we need drones, we need missiles and soldiers. So I think in many ways the fault was on both sides. I just hope, and I'm sure Zelensky hopes, that his recent appointments of General Drapatyi and at the moment an interim defence minister from the SBU will gradually calm things down, and the war can now be pursued on a more collaborative basis. But it's the last thing that Ukraine wanted was a major bust-up within its defence system. Yes, I think when you combine together the attacks on the shadow tanker fleet in the Black Sea, together with the long-range Ukrainian attacks on oil infrastructure. Now, I think in April there were 21 attacks on oil infrastructure, and it's carried on since. And as I say, we've seen the huge queues for petrol. I mean, Russia depends so much on its export of energy, oil and gas. And if Ukraine successfully manages to put a dent in that income, that will be very significant. And now is the moment, if ever there was a moment, for the UK and France and Germany and Denmark and Sweden and all those countries, through which these shadow tankers pass, really to interdict more shadow tanker vessels. Yes, of course it's high risk. Of course it will anger Putin, and of course Putin will seek to retaliate. But this is unfortunately is the nature of war.